think I'm finally happy enough with the build to share it with you all. The idea was to create a really simple build, something anyone can play right from the start of the game without having to know how Path of Exile works. We're going to be using Skeletal Snipers for this build, and that's the only minion we'll be using. I'm at the point where I can clear T16 maps with +2 to monster level. We can run almost any content with this build at all, with the exception of Breach. Sometimes our minions clear out the monsters quick enough, but sometimes they don't, since the minions we're using don't actually have built-in AoE. The footage you saw during the montage was entirely from the Cruel campaign. I do have footage from when I was mapping, but once I reached endgame I made some massive changes to the build, and it is changes I would recommend that you make yourself, but the build kind of has two versions, and for the most part we'll be covering the main version of the build that you'll be using throughout the entire campaign and for most of mapping. For those of you who prefer written guides, I've done a deep dive over on Mobalytics, so check the description for that link. The first skill you unlock should be this Skeletal Sniper, which you can do with your very first uncut skill gem. Equip this in the gem menu G and invest all your spirit in them by clicking the plus button. Skeletal Snipers will consume less spirit as you level up the gem, but also with quality. So your first 4 gem cut prisons that you get dropped or purchased via currency exchange when you reach endgame should be invested into your Skeletal Sniper gem. At first your gems will only have 2 links, meaning we can only apply 2 support gems to it. But again, Skeletal Sniper is the gem you want to invest in the most, so as and when you get Jeweler's Orbs, make sure to use them on your snipers. This will allow you to add more support gems to your skill. Much later into the build we will be corrupting our gem using a Val Orb to try get +1 levels to the skill. But make sure not to do this until you've got a gem with max quality and maximum amount of slots, as once you corrupt something you cannot use any other orbs on the item. I'm going to write this script assuming you don't already have another character with currency to spare, as well as not having spare support gems, as level 2 and level 3 support gems do not have a level requirement, so for new characters you can actually start with much stronger support skills, as well as more links on your skills. Level 1 support gems are pretty limiting. There are not a lot of useful options, but we do get access to Scattershot, which on paper actually lowers your damage, but it does give you 2 extra projectiles whenever your skeletons attack, but also when you actively fire off a gas arrow. So although your damage per shot is lower, the area the gas covers is much greater, allowing you to clear levels faster. It's important to note that certain supports may look incredible, such as Brutality, but by removing all non-physical damage, our gas arrow now does 0 damage and is useless. If you don't want to run Scattershot early, feel free to just run nothing until you unlock level 2 supports. Gas Arrow is an active skill that comes built in with our Skeletal Snipers, so make sure you add it to your hotbar. When we activate this skill, one of our Skeletal Archers will fire off a gas arrow on our target. This alone is an okay skill, dealing a moderate amount of poison damage, but where the skill really shines is by detonating the poison with the fire ability. Early on we can use Firewall, but I did swap to Solar Orb, which seems to work much better for bosses as it lasts longer. To save mana you don't actually need to level up these abilities. The detonation of the gas cloud does 600% damage, and all the damage comes from your skeletons. The fire skill does not affect the amount of damage it does. Detonating the gas cloud converts all the physical damage into fire damage, so to amplify this we can run a curse called Flammability that reduces the fire resistance of enemies that stand within the curse. But more on that later. Once you start getting level 2 support gems, you can go ahead and use Feeding Frenzy and Bidding. Feeding Frenzy increases your minions' damage, but also increases how much damage they take. Similar to Scattershot, this might feel a little bit rough early on, as we don't actually have our passive nodes unlocked that allow minions to respawn faster. Personally though, your damage output will be so high that you won't have any issues with minion downtime, especially when using Bidding. This support gem increases the damage of your minion's active ability, so in our case, Gas Arrow. Finally, once you get level 3 support gems, you get access to a whole heap of exciting supports. Fork is a great option to run alongside Scattershot to drastically increase your clear speed, whereas Fire Mastery, Chaos Mastery, Physical Mastery and Minion Mastery all increase the level of your gem by 1. Now personally, these aren't really worth running, unless by boosting the skill by 1 level, gets you over the next threshold to lower the spirit cost of your minions. Instead, if you have 3 slots, I would continue running Bidding, Scattershot and Fork. But for anyone lucky enough to get a 4th link, I would add Feeding Frenzy. Eventually you will get a 5th slot, but by then you're likely to be pretty well geared, with many pieces of gear boosting the level of your minions, and with high level minions, your gas arrow mana cost starts getting out of control, especially when you're running 20 or more minions. This is where we make the big change to our build, but I'll cover that later on in the video. As stated earlier, we need some fire damage to ignite enemies within the gas. It's the igniting of the mob that actually causes the gas to explode. My choice of fire skill was Solar Orb. I didn't level this gem up much from its original level to save on mana costs, and I didn't end up running any support skills on it. Make sure to drop this skill on the mob within the gas rather than anywhere else within the gas. It has to ignite the enemy mob for the big damage. Since the bulk of our damages come from gas arrow exploding, causing massive fire damage, it only makes sense to run a curse that lowers enemy fire resistance. Flammability does exactly that. You can only run one curse without investing in a node on the passive tree, something we won't be doing. While vulnerability would increase the damage of our minions when we aren't using gas arrow, the damage output of gas arrow far outweighs the standard damage from our snipers, so we lean to running flammability until very late in game. For support gems, I'd suggest inspiration to reduce the mana cost, and persistence to make it last longer. Once you unlock a third link, I like to run Hex Bloom. This spreads our curse onto other enemies when they die. It's not very useful for bosses, but it can help our snipers clear map mechanics quicker, stuff like Breach. Pain Offering is a big damage increase for our minions. You aim it at your minions and then sacrifice one or two of them to buff the rest. In terms of support gems, my go-to is Ablation and Dance Macabre, with Expanse being a great third option when you invest in it. The problem, however, is these supports are level 3. So before then, you don't really have anything good to run on it. Once you complete your first Ascendancy trial, you'll want to unlock the skill Summon Infernal Hound. While it does not consume spirit to summon, you might need to turn it on in the skills menu by right clicking it. This is one of the skills that I've played with a lot. For the most part, we'll be using the Hound as an automatic ignite tool, meaning unless our Hound is busy or stuck, we no longer need to cast Solar Orb. There are a lot of options in terms of supports for us here. We've got a tanky route using Meat Shield and Elemental Army, and these are two very important supports later on, as the Hound takes a lot of damage instead of us, so a tanky doggo means a tanky us. If you found your Hound is surviving enough without these, you can run Fire Exposure to reduce the fire resistance on your targets, which can be further amplified with Strip Away, increasing the fire exposure's effectiveness by 30%. As your character levels up, you'll actually start unlocking more supports for this, so it doesn't cost any Dual Orbs to do this. I did play with the idea of adding Envenom and Corrosion, allowing our Hound to poison targets and break their armor in the process. However, a comment on YouTube gave me a much better solution. This is more of a late game change, which I was going to save until later, but we can run a second Skeletal Sniper gem with added poison damage, corrosion and demolish to fully break the armor of a target instead. Though personally, until late game, I wouldn't worry about this on any of your skills. When you reach maps, Grim Feast is no longer optional, and honestly, if I used it during the campaign, I probably would have done it deathless. Unfortunately, Grim Feast is a ludicrously strong spirit gem that will get nerfed. I'm just hoping they don't butcher it. Essentially, when revivable minions or enemies die, there's a 50% chance they leave a spirit behind. If you were to pick the spirits up, it would restore Energy Shield, unless you're at max Energy Shield. In this case, it will provide an overshield up to 100% of your max Energy Shield. If that didn't quite make sense, this one single gem is essentially doubling your Energy Shield. The only reason I didn't run it during the campaign was for the memes. I wanted to get as many skeletons out as possible, but by the end it was taking 3 gas arrows to kill a boss, so I didn't need that many skeletons for the campaign. Feel free to run Clarity in Grim Feast. It does increase the spirit reservation by 10, so potentially Grim Feast is now costing 2 minions, but it can help maintain mana to spam gas arrow. Fun fact about Grim Feast, it's actually a minion skill, so we get a lot more benefit out of this skill than some builds, since we're actually stacking plus levels to minion skills in our gear. Why no Summon Raging Spirits, or SRS as they are known as? To be completely truthful, the first idea of this build was to create something different that didn't rely on SRS. But as I got more and more into the build, I actually decided I'd rather have more skeleton snipers out. I imagine the clear speed of this build would probably go up if we ran SRS, but I like that we're not. The good news is this section is a lot more simple, and unless I find some important nodes I missed, or a more efficient way to travel between nodes, this is the version of the passive skill tree you will follow from level 2 to 100. As far as pathing goes, the rough idea is to focus on minion nodes first, then when you have all your minion nodes, focus on the nodes that affect your character. Start by pathing up the left side, grabbing the minion damage nodes until you reach the first attribute node. Feel free to pick intelligence or strength for your attribute nodes. You will possibly need some dexterity nodes to allow you to use all your green support gems. Strength is the preferred option, as each point in strength increases your max life. You will, however, eventually need 205 intelligence for level 20 skills by the time you're level 90. After this, the rest can go into strength for more life. Branch off to the left, grabbing the next 3 attribute nodes, before heading up and left, grabbing most of the minion nodes in this cluster, before continuing up to the top of the tree and grabbing the empty jewel slot. But don't worry about jewels, we'll grab the other slots later, and we'll cover what to put in them when we go over gear. From here, take the attribute node on your right and head straight up to Lord of Horrors, which provides reduced reservation of our minions, which is huge for us. Now head left from the jewel node to the next cluster of minion nodes, Holy Protector, Silent Guardian, and Bringer of Order, increasing our minions' life, resistances, and damage. Now we'll head back down to our first attribute node and head towards the minion cluster up and to the right called Gravedigger, Necrotized Flesh, and Relentless Fallen, once again providing our minions with damage and survivability, while also decreasing their revival time and a lovely quality of life addition in the form of healing from our minions being revived. Moving back to the top of the tree, we want to work on grabbing our minion crit nodes, bypassing the energy shield nodes for later. The main one is called Necrotic Touch. We also want to get our other crit related nodes located down and to the left of Necrotic Touch, but we'll get to them with the energy shield node called Heavy Buffer. Initially I did not want to take this node as it reduces our max life, which as you'll see when we cover Ascendancy is not something we want to do, but the amount of shield it provides way outweighs the loss of 10% life. You should have all the minion skills in this build now, so we actually allocate Deadly Swarm via our necklace, so again, worry about that when you have a shiny expensive necklace. Feel free to clean up now by grabbing all the remaining jewel slots and energy shield nodes, focusing on reaching all the big nodes before taking the smaller surrounding nodes. Your first 2 Ascendancy points come around Act 2 via the Trial of Sekhmet. Some builds will struggle to finish this when they first get access to it, but our build should find it pretty easy. If you try it and it's too difficult, don't feel disheartened and come back when you are a higher level. I'll be honest with you, I actually failed this trial when I went to go back to get my 3rd Ascendancy, so in the end I just used the Trial of Chaos for my Ascendancy 2, 3 and 4. Your first 2 points should go towards the Infernal Hound. As long as he's alive, we're a lot more tanky, and as I stated earlier, he will running around igniting enemies and detonating your gas clouds. After that we pass down the left hand side and pick up Altered Flesh, which also aids in our tankiness, but more importantly, it will give us access to the rest of our nodes. The final 4 points might seem scary on paper as we're going to be sacrificing 50% of our life, but in return, a quarter of our life is being converted into a massive energy shield, and with Grim Feast, we can essentially double whatever benefit this provides. The other quarter is going to be converted into Spirit, essentially we can get even more minions out. These 2 nodes are called Badat's Will and Badat's Hand. Before we go into items, I will say you'll see a pattern in what we're looking for. Essentially there are certain stats that we can prioritize again and again, one of which is a way to increase the amount of rarity of gear that we're being dropped. In my opinion, there's a big issue in Path of Exile right now. We're almost forced to run a stat that increases the rarity of items dropped, but doing this not only increases the cost of the items we want to buy, but it makes it harder to get all the defensive stats we're looking for to ensure we reach resistance cap with the sizable health pool, all while not giving up potential spirit rolls, stat rolls, and level increases on our gear. It's really tricky to balance all this, so sometimes you will just have to drop one or the other. Don't be worried when you see all these uniques. I will go into more depth on each of these in their respective categories, though while leveling through the campaign, your first 2 Exalted Orbs should be spent on the chest piece in Folding Dawn and the Shield Oak Swarm. The necklace is expensive at around 2 divines, but you won't need that until you're deep in the endgame. In terms of scepters, I don't fuss over which one I use. Omen Scepter is great for reducing enemies' crit resistances, Stoic Scepter provides our minions with an energy shield based on your mana pool, and Wrestling Scepter gives you 2 Skeletal Warriors to add to your army. What truly matters here is your sub-rolls. You want as many plus level of minion skills as possible, as well as the highest spirit roll you can find. I don't fuss over the other rolls at all. You should be able to pick up a plus 4 levels to minion skills, and at least 40% increased spirit for 1 Exalted Orb in the current market. Lastly, make sure you increase the quality of your scepters as it gives you more spirit again. Keep an eye out that the scepters you buy aren't corrupted if they don't have plus 20% quality, as you won't be able to increase this once the item is corrupted. For offhand, we run the unique Shield Oaksworn as it provides us with plus 50 spirit. We never change this item. 50 spirit might not sound like a lot, but by endgame that's 2 extra minions. One of your first Exalted drops should be spent on a unique chest piece in Folding Dawn, as it provides 100 spirit. The resistances are a nice bonus, but sadly the final roll means we have to replace this chest piece as soon as we hit maps. I'd highly suggest looking for an Expert Shaman's Mantle, as its primary stat roll is spirit. On top of that, it can roll a second line of spirit as a sub roll, so that's what I'd look for. Body armor can't roll rarity of items found, so look out for one with as much life as you can afford, or having at least 2 different resistances on it. As with scepters, beware when buying corrupted gear, as you can't modify it further. You will want to improve the quality of this item to plus 20%, as well as sticking 2 sockets on it, which for now I would suggest socketing 2 resistance runes to help you get to 75% in all resistances. This one is super simple. Look for anything with plus 1 levels of minion skills, or if you can get it cheap enough, a plus 2 level of minion skills. Besides that, you'll want to grab maximum life, some resistances, and rarity of loot. This build will not typically have high dexterity, so make sure you're not buying gear with evasion rating as a primary stat. It will just have way too high a dexterity requirement, you will not be able to wear it. We'll start with the amulet. I would recommend starting with a basic solar amulet, as it has a spirit primary roll and can roll a second line of spirit as a sub roll, though this might get expensive when we factor in all the other parts. As with all our gear, we're looking for a combination of max life, increased rarity of items, and ideally 2 lines of resistances. If you throw all these substats into POE trade, you're looking close to 20 exalts. If we remove the substat line of spirit, it goes down to a single exalted orb. For rings, we ideally want amethyst rings to boost our chaos resistance, but these can get pretty expensive, so feel free to pick up whatever you can afford with maximum life, 2 lines of resistances, and rarity of items. You'll have to do some tricky maths to make sure you can get all your resistances to 75%, but it's absolutely crucial that you try and do this. Belts are super useful defensively. It's another case where I don't fuss over the primary stat, I just look for one with maximum life, and if I can afford it, 3 lines of resistance. Otherwise, 2 will do for now. As for charm, I would recommend something that counters freeze, but early game just use whatever you can to achieve resistance caps. Gloves don't need their own category, since I just get whatever I can with maximum life, resistances, and rarity of items. Boots, however, there are a lot of good rolls. I managed to reach the resistance caps by this point, so my boots have movement speed, rarity of items found, followed by a strength roll and an intelligence roll. At the time, I needed these stats to equip my shaman mantle or getting high enough intelligence for my skills. For you, if you don't need the stats, aim for maximum life and 2 rolls of resistances. If you've reached endgame, let's talk about the decisions you want to slowly make to change your build. For starters, you will want to make your snipers a 6 link, either by getting a jeweler's orbs as drops or using currency exchange like I did. We'll cover what supports you run very soon. You'll also want to have invested a few exalted orbs into a helmet with 2 levels of minion skill, around 1 divine into a strong shaman mantle, providing 80 plus spirit, and a good chunk of life, and most likely another divine into a strong stoic or omen scepter, providing at least 4 levels to minion skills and around 200 spirit. The next big item will be the amulet fire flower with another 4 levels of skills. This item buffs fire skills though, not minion skills. But skeletal snipers are not considered just a minion skill, they're also considered a fire skill, physical skill, and chaos skill. So plus level to any of these affects our snipers. However, they are not a spell skill, so plus level to fire or chaos spell skills do not work. You might also notice you take damage for igniting enemies while wearing this amulet, though this doesn't matter for 2 reasons. The first is we are not igniting the enemies, our minions are, and 2, our minions aren't igniting enemies either anymore. Having skeletal snipers at level 30 or higher just makes the cost of gas arrow too high. It's time to essentially drop this skill entirely. This is where I remove flammability and solar orb in place of vulnerability. We are no longer reducing the fire defenses of our targets, but the physical instead. In terms of support, I now run Cursed Ground to leave my curse on the ground. I will state that I tried to run Hex Bloom to spread the curse to other mobs, but I'm not actually sure it works with Cursed Ground, and in the end I didn't actually need it. My minions clear the maps way too fast. So this does mean our job has now been designated as Loot Goblin. My current setup with vulnerability is Curse Ground, Persistence, Inspiration, and Heightened Curse to boost the effect of vulnerability. Since our skeletal snipers are no longer using gas arrow, we can actually slot Brutality for the big physical damage increase. Alongside Brutality, we now run Heft, Feeding Frenzy, Scattershot, and Fork. As stated earlier, thanks to a comment, I do actually now run a second skeletal sniper gem. This one is supported by Corrosion, Deadly Poison, Demolish, and Chaos Mastery. We're only running a single one of these snipers because he actually does less damage than the other orb, but his job is to simply drop a gas arrow on a target, which now instantly breaks the armor completely on the target. Now there is a slight problem with doing this, which is our Infernal Hound would actually detonate the gas cloud. So to stop this, we want to run Elemental Mastery. This increases his elemental damage while making him unable to ignite enemies. So now my current Hound setup is Elemental Focus, Culling Strike, since why not? Essentially this just kills off a target when it gets to a certain health pool. I'm running Fire Mastery for the extra level. I'm running Meat Shield and Elemental Army. All of these last three basically make him a little bit tankier. Lastly, you want to make sure you've unlocked your duel slots and started slotting minion duels in them. You want to get at least plus 15% minion damage per duel, and if you're willing to spend more you can get minion crit chance, minion crit damage, and even minion attack speed. If you've bought Fire Flower, it's now time to allocate Deadly Swarm. While holding Alt, we can hover over Deadly Swarm in the passive skill tree and see that it uses Paranoia, Despair, and Disgust in that order. Purchase those from the currency exchange, right click on one of them to open up the distill menu and insert your necklace and the 3 vials. Make sure it says allocate Deadly Swarm and you're good to go. This now unlocks the node Deadly Swarm just by having the necklace equipped. We do this because the other surrounding nodes are just not really worth investing 4 to 5 levels just to get there. All the other nodes on a tree that we go to are surrounded by other clusters of useful nodes, so the travel cost to get there is a lot more worth it. I think that's all the changes I made. My advice is to just play around with the first version of the build. Maybe don't take everything I've said and try to come up with your own version of this build when you reach the sort of higher tiers of endgame. The one problem you'll probably run into with the old version of the build using Gas Arrow is as you get more and more gear, as you get stronger, the mana cost of Gas Arrow just becomes out of control. But you can counter this. You can get mana regeneration on gear, you can get mana regeneration in terms of passive skills, or just increase your mana capacity by getting more intelligence. There are many ways you can attempt to counter this. So this is my version where we've gone fully physical. It makes it an incredibly lazy build where you just run through and your minions do absolutely everything for you. Essentially you could argue this is a league starter build. For those of you who might not have played Path of Exile 1, leagues are basically the same as seasons in games like Diablo, and they usually come with some mechanics and stuff like that. Quite often people would run something called a league starter, which is a cheaper build to get themselves started in the league before trying the more interesting, expensive builds, which, you know, would be funded by the league starter. Anyway, huge thank you for the support on the latest Path of Exile content. The views, likes, and subs are honestly crazy. So, Happy New Year. Hit subscribe if you want. I really don't like to ask. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you all again really, really soon. Bye bye.